Well, the Supreme Court has spoken against the tariffs. What is President Trump's next move, and how does it affect your money? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. If you got a question for me, I'd invite you to go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. There is a link at the top of the page that says Ask Prudent Money. Just click through that link and send us a question, and I'll get you taken care of. That's off the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Well, what a complicated mess today that we saw demonstrated in the markets and the office of president and the Supreme Court. And what does it all mean? Now, here is what I'm not trying to do. Not trying to be a fearmonger, not trying to be gloom and doom about anything. Yeah, it was a tough day on the market. It could have been a lot worse. Not giving any negative opinions about anybody. I'm just here to tell you what I saw and tell you what I think it means, and then you, of course, can make your own decisions. I'm always going back to Proverbs 22:3. Excuse me. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to put up a little bit of that today as well. Proverbs 22:3 is what I call the verse of risk when it comes to stewardship. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. We'll talk about this risk a lot, this verse a lot, because it simply says, are you comfortable with the risk you're taking? And if you're not, what are you going to change? And that's what is so central as far as we go as investors and stewards being called to do what we do with what God blesses us with, which is everything. How are we a good steward of what God blesses us with? So let's start off. It's a crazy story, but I'll tell you this, is that, and we've talked about this many times in the past, I could not see any good ways that this is going to end as far as this decision. I couldn't see any possible ways. In fact, I'm surprised, well, we'll get into that, but any possible ways that this would not get struck down unless the Supreme Court was not too, a little bit concerned about the blowback. And this is not just blowback of Trump proportion. This is blowback of things that they don't even know yet is going to be blowback. I mean, this puts us in unprecedented waters for sure. But the U.S. Supreme Court on Friday dealt a blow to President Donald Trump's economic agenda, saying he exceeded his authority in using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to justify most of his tariffs. The majority opinion from the High Court found that the 1977 law gives the president a lengthy list, in quotes, a lengthy list of powers, but does not include any mention of tariffs or duties. Yet, the Supreme Court's decision does not mean Trump is now entirely unable to slap tariffs on other countries' products. That I did not see coming, because you would think that if he was able to do it in most situations or half the situations, he'd be able to do it in all. So obviously it gets very complicated. The president, for example, has at his disposal Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, the same tool he used to impose import taxes on steel, aluminum, lumber, and furniture. And he called the decision deeply disappointing in a statement at the White House and told reporters that he would impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122 of the Trade Acts of 1974. He also If you're the Supreme Court or whomever they obviously they don't put it together, but if you're Congress who put these together, you might want to check and double check against others that when one door closes, another one doesn't open, because that is how that it looks. But he didn't stop at 10%. On Saturday, he took a swing at 15%. Now, this is what concerns me. Is not that he's making that he makes threats and says things that you wish he wouldn't say, all that type of thing. This is a situation where if he really seeks to fight back, so to speak, that this could be can turn out to be not such a good thing for consumers of U.S. goods and consumers of this economy. He said, and I quote, that he's going to use an obnoxious use of tariffs. So we'll see what that means probably going forward. But that's a little bit of a warm-up in case you missed some of the story. Now let's talk a little bit about what in the world do you do with all that money? So let's walk through it. I'm not sure how many hundreds of billions of dollars we're talking about. There's been numbers thrown around. Quite frankly, they're estimated, we'll put it lightly, estimated numbers and political numbers and all that kind of thing. But what is the real number? Who really knows? But the bottom line is, if I paid tariffs on something that I wasn't supposed to, don't have to find out, I want to be paid back, and I want to be paid as soon as possible. What about households, U.S. households? It says with the new batch of levies, households could possibly pay approximately $1,200 annually due to tariffs, according to updated Yale Budget Lab projections. Even though a wide swath, I guess that's how you say that, of tariffs have been struck down, it will not translate into a price cut for consumers. She noted what we've seen historically is when the tariffs come down, if prices increase, they don't come down. Listen to the reasoning. And I'll translate this to something that you and I both know, unfortunately, that has happened. Unless there's some outside push like a new competitor, businesses will not cut prices that customers have grown accustomed to paying. And that's specifically the case here. Particularly if a business thinks more tariffs are coming, why would they lower them just to have to raise them again? You saw that with prices and with COVID. And I talk about this all the time. This laid an impression on me is the commercial on Channel 8 of the worried gentleman they were interviewing that had a restaurant. And he said, well, it looks like, all my competition is raising their prices, and I better raise mine to keep up. And you saw a lot of prices get increased and not go back down. We're still paying unbelievable amounts of, especially in restaurants, increased costs for meals. And it's one of the reasons why that I believe that inflation has acted the way it has, because the inflation that never tends to go away has stuck around and kind of become implemented into everyday life. That's what's disturbing. But the other thing is, as you can imagine, there's very little evidence to believe that the government will return refunds. After all, get this, what can you do with the money that was paid in that is not ours? And then they talked about companies and attorneys and tying this kind of thing up into court. I mean, you got to look at it from the standpoint that companies have three different choices when they're going to import goods and services into the country. If a tariff is slapped on their widgets, let's call them widgets they're selling, they can eat the cost, they can pass it down to the consumer, or they can forget the U.S. and go somewhere else and buy their widgets. And we've seen a little bit of that happening. I don't think that it's going to take a while for that to be a full-blown problem, just because to switch to find another country that's selling what you're looking for and all that type of thing is not that readily available. But you got to look at this, and I've talked about this before, that any standard trade agreement between two countries, from beginning to end in implementation, takes roughly 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years on average. So if you can imagine winding this down, and not only winding down money that was paid that should have never been paid, according to the Supreme Court. That is the question as to how do you handle that. And we've got a lot more to talk about, because we also have a little bit of a battle going on between the economy and inflation. And of course, as we're talking, everything we're talking about does lend to potentially weaken the economy and increase inflation. More on that in a minute. This is Bob Brooks. Stick around. I'll be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
Dr. Charles Stanley.
We need his wisdom, his guidance, his direction, his protection, to be sensitive every day for what's going on around us. So, how do you begin your day? If he's my guide, he also has a right to give me a schedule, to show me how to walk it out and to live it out every day.
The teaching of Dr. Charles Stanley on In Touch, helping you grow in Christ every day.
In Touch, weekdays at 12:30.
This is Rob Randall, your host and teacher of the Invisible War radio program. The Invisible War is the study of God's Word on how to walk in Christ's victory in the spiritual battles we face against the powers of darkness. Join me every Sunday morning at 9, right here on KDKR and KYJC in Commerce, your station for life.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks a lot for listening today. You know I do appreciate it. You can go to the top of the front page. It says Ask Prudent Money. If you got a question, be sure and go there, click the link, and send it in. We'll get you taken care of, or point you to resources, or we'll give you an opinion. If you've got something you want an opinion on, I've always got an opinion and be happy to give it to you. Can't tell you whether it's right or wrong. But that's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. So there's 2 or 3 other things I want to talk about. But before we go there, I want to talk a little bit about what's happening with the economy and versus inflation. But the other thing I want to talk about, and we want to really get into this subject and keep an eye on it, because this could be a real issue that spells risk. What's happening with the private lenders, and this is something that keeps popping up, keeps on coming. The stories that keep coming up, they're a little bit worrisome. Private lender takes the place of a banker and fills that gap where the business owner or the individual can't borrow money traditionally, has to have somebody, a non-traditional banker, and ends up paying these outrageous interest fees. We're seeing a lot of concern with private lenders, and especially some of the bigger ones, one of them being, if you saw all the paper that I have sitting out here, you would understand why I can't find this. Oh, Blue Owl, that's it. Well, so is this a concern? If you saw this happen, if a company gives money or returns dividends to investors on a quarterly basis, quarter by quarter, then stops and says, we're going to have to do it a different way. Is that reason for concern? Absolutely, that's reason for concern, and that's what had this space of lenders and banks under big selling pressure today. We'll keep an eye on that. Talk about that later on during the week. How about a piece of good news? Stocks did not tank today. That's great news. It could have been a whole lot worse. So I don't want to overstate any of this. I don't want to understate any of this. I just want to make you aware of what's going on. But stocks did not tank today, and I think that's a very good thing. And we've had a lot of experience where President Trump has reacted the way he's reacted over the weekend, and it blew over to some degree. So we'll see. The other thing that happened today is interest rates came down in the 10-year bond. That's a good thing. That's good news. We want to see that. Had a big down day. You really want to see that when stocks tank and when the economy is giving sort of kind of good news. Let's talk about U.S. GDP. My wife and I were driving somewhere. My son mentioned something about economic growth. And my wife said, "What's GDP?" And I always take for granted how these aren't terms that people just know off the tip of their tongue. That talks about the growth in the economy, how much the growth is occurring. And what happens is the economists come out and they say, well, we predict that and forecast that the growth in the economy will be X percent over this last 4 quarters. And then if they're way off, the market usually reacts negatively. If they're right on or they underestimate it, the market usually takes that as a good thing. Well, they said that they felt like GDP would increase by 2.2%. And after all, last month it was 4.4%, which in an economy that's stagnating like this one is, that would have been a good number. 1.4% in the fourth quarter, and not a good report. But especially when you look at the other types of reports that have come out about the growth in the economy. So looking for 2.2%, got 1.4%. That's a pretty big miss by economists. And they go to blaming the shutdown. Well, that should have been factored in, or maybe it was. Who knows? Who really knows? But what I do know is that we keep coming back to inflation, and we keep coming back to different opinions as to, do we have inflation? Do we not have inflation? Is it a problem? Is it not a problem? Is it going up or is it going back down? Will the Fed raise rates? Will the Fed cut rates? And so on and so forth. It just goes on and on and on. And this was so odd about this time around, is that there's so many different block or population different percentages of people who've got a different opinion as to what's going to happen to inflation, which we already are at a little bit of uncomfortable level. Well, and I'm going to post this probably tomorrow, but there is and pardon some of the terms I'm going to use, but I'll explain what they mean. There is an economic indicator called the velocity of money, and what that means is it talks about the measurement of how money circulates through the economy. So if you have a high velocity of money, that means you're heading to more inflation. If you have a low velocity of money, that means you're going the other way, which is called deflation. Well, I looked at the chart because I hadn't looked at it in a while, and sure enough, it is turned around and it's going up. Just starting to go that way. I don't think that's something we can ignore, but I haven't seen it reported as of yet. But I think we got to keep our eye on that, because if that keeps going up, that's telling us that something's not right. So you get that. You get at best a stagnating economy. That's all. It seems that that's all the thing the economy has done is just stagnate. If you start to see those go in opposite directions, which they look like they're doing, not that they couldn't stop, not that they could turn around, but the problem is, if I'm the Federal Reserve Board, remember, if I want to fight inflation, I do something totally opposite if I want to fight a recession. So if I want to fight inflation, I have to raise rates. And there was a little bit of talk of raising rates amongst some of the Federal Board governors, the governors of the Fed, I guess that's what they're called, and, just amongst themselves. Not a whole lot. Some that actually thought that should happen. But if you do that, you end up tanking the economy. This is the great conundrum that this puts all economists into. Do I raise or do I lower, or do I advocate for either one? Because if you lower rates, you're going to push inflation up. So it is a real tough one, and that's what I think. As a lot of things that we need to do is keep an eye on that. I think that the news cycle is pretty well careful about what they say. I don't know. It's just amazing to me about the things that does come out of the news cycle and the things that don't come out of the news cycle, and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And all I can say is that's what I see as far as what's going on in the economy. I believe Wednesday or Thursday, one of those days, will be my next day that I have free to talk about whatever you want to talk about. I've got guests on the other days. And we'll talk about, what if I want to reduce risk? Where would I go? What would I invest in? To give you a little bit of a preview, it really comes down to a concept called correlated investments. Whether a investment is correlated or non-correlated. And when you understand this concept, it's very, very simple. I'm not going to get into it today. Don't have time. But when you really understand this concept, you understand, hey, there are things I can do, or you understand that if you have your investment advisor talks about it or doesn't talk about it, or doesn't believe in it or does believe in it, what your options are. And I think that's what is extremely important to always know, is what are your options. And we'll be talking about that. I believe it'll be on Thursday. So in the meantime, if you have any questions at all about anything, go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com, and there is a link at the top. It says Ask Prudent Money, And if you would, just send your question in. We'll get you taken care of. We take those very seriously, and we'd love to get you pointed in the right direction. Once again, if you have a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.